Today we're making our coconuts 57 times more powerful, and somehow it all hinges on fermenting fish. Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers. Let's have a look at some of our new and innovative ways to ruin the tropical paradise of Pelagos, specifically by using its coconuts for industrial scale booze production. As we've discussed, Pelagos abhors electrical systems, and so we've been trying to run everything we can using diesel-powered machines, whether that's inserters, assemblers, calciners, or even lighthouses. Conveniently, diesel is a fairly vague term in this context. We can run these machines off lots of different hydrocarbons. On Coconut Island, that largely meant using coconut oil because it was cheap and abundant. On the home island, at the start of last stream, we were largely using methane, which was being shipped in from various methane patches out in the sea. This worked really well at first. The methane was being barrelled up and brought in by ship, and the island was chugging away nicely. However, these sort of patches do get depleted. They're mechanically equivalent to the oil patches on Norvis, so whilst they don't run out completely, they do slow down and down to the point where the amount of resource you're getting out is basically a technicality. And so, we expanded out. We tapped 3 more methane patches, giving us in total about 12 times the production rate of our first patch, and that was great. Methane was abundant again, but in the long run, these patches will go the same way, slowing down to the point where it'll be problematic, and we'd like to be able to leave this planet alone to be self-sufficient, and we'd like to play some more with some of the planet's mechanics. When we tapped our first methane patch, that unlocked the fermentation bacteria research which Mike needed for his titanium production, but at the time we didn't notice that this also unlocked ethanol, which is a little ironic as when we first arrived on the planet, I'd spotted that as something I wanted to investigate, possibly due to some latent alcoholism, or maybe engineering instincts, who can say. Ethanol is an alternative fuel source that gives vehicles more speed than methane and also has a higher energy density. But more importantly, when we looked at the recipe, we realised that it's made entirely from renewable resources, specifically coconuts. The activated carbon is already being produced on Coconut Island, as are the nutrients, although the nutrients are all being kept inside the coconut processing to power the biochambers. Water is of course trivial on an ocean planet. Fortunately, any salt in that water doesn't seem to upset the process. The only unknown part of this is the fermentation bacteria, and that was only unknown to me. Mike had already started producing his own fermentation systems as part of the titanium production. And so Sophia tasked me to start producing ethanol in sufficient quantities to power any part of the factory that might require it. Since so many of the resources were being made in that area, I decided it made sense to add it in on Coconut Island, even if it is starting to get a little full over there. We may need to make another plantation island at some point in the future, but for now it seems to be working. So, now we see the production chain. This biochamber at the top does the fish breeding, taking in 2 fish, a load of nutrients, and producing 3. That seems fair enough. These fish are then passed down into the bacteria cultivation, where we use the fish as feedstock to breed the bacteria, presumably fermenting the fish in the process. Delicious, at least in Sweden. That concoction of bacteria is then fed down the other side of the fish belt, where it can be picked up by the ethanol biochambers and combined with the activated carbon and nutrients on the belt to the left, as well as the water being piped in from the ocean. This generates the ethanol, which gets passed out to the pipes on the left, where it can power all of the inserters in this area, and then any excess flows into the top tanks. Once those top tanks are at 3000, any further ethanol production gets passed over into the main storage tanks to the right, where it's linked to the barrelling machines in the port, allowing a ship to arrive with empty barrels and leave with full ones. I've copied Tristan's design from the methane patches here, because it's a really neat design, using the short and extra long inserters allowing the barrels to be passed out and back along the same row. There's also an additional barrelling machine at the top to fill the ship's fuel barrels up to make sure it can keep travelling. This is working quite nicely, as you can see if I look on the circuit network here. There's lots of ethanol in the tanks. We need to have at least 250,000 in there before a booze cruise docks, and there's enough behind the bar for several at this point. Getting the initial system bootstrapped did require a bit of manual hand feeding. The inserters wouldn't be powered until we'd made our first ethanol, but I was on site anyway to do the building, so getting a bit of fermented fish on my hands was easy enough, if a little gross. The basic design is good, and I'm pretty happy with it, but there are some implementation issues. I tried to get the ratios about right, and the first machine produces 1.16 fish per second, the bacteria production uses 0.5 fish per second, so I put in 2 of them. However, I forgot that the fish breeding is, breeding, and therefore requires an input of fish as well. That input is 0.66 fish per second, meaning that the output is actually only 0.5 fish per second, enough to supply one bacteria machine, so I'll either need to add some speed modules, which would increase nutrient consumption, or add in an additional fish breeder to actually produce the number we want to see. Okay, that's fixable, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised that an engineer forgot how breeding works. The next ratio I did get right. Bacteria production is 9 per second, minus the 0.5 required on the input. I rounded down to 8 per second, and with 2 machines allegedly making them, that should be 16 per second. Ethanol distillers use 1 per second, so I put in 16 machines to balance that out. That fitted in surprisingly neatly, with only a little wooden platform required at the bottom for the return belts. Next up, I forgot that the ethanol machines could have nutrients go off inside them, so my distillery was gradually filling up with sludge. Since there doesn't seem to be much demand for Marmite on this planet, this needed to be cleaned out. At the moment, that's not too serious. They're running basically all the time, so the nutrients are mostly getting used up, but they are slowly filling their trash slots, so something will need to be done about that. Again, this isn't going to be a serious problem. We can just unload any spoilage onto the fish and bacteria belt. That's already dealing with spoilage up here in the top corner. Another limitation on the system is how quickly we can pump the nutrients in. This is a very nutrient-heavy process. The fish breeding takes 100 nutrients per fish, and ethanol production takes another 20 each time it runs. Okay, that produces 120 ethanol, but it's still a lot of nutrients. Just using the surplus from the original coconut oil production system wasn't remotely able to cope, so I added some more biochambers off to the left of it, since that's where there was some room, to produce almost a full belt of nutrients. This still wasn't enough, so I doubled it to produce 2 belts and then injected the second one halfway down the ethanol production. I think the best way to improve this is going to be to use stack inserters to get more on the belt. However, I'm not using anything that's powered by electricity on this island, which means we need to start producing the diesel stack inserters, which is sadly gated behind Pelagos' science pack, which we haven't made yet. So maybe in a week or two. Finally, the other ingredient for getting us properly boozed up is the activated carbon to filter out any nasty impurities. We don't want hangovers. We had a good healthy production of this just to the north, burning coconut husks into coal, coal into carbon, and then carbon into activated carbon. But since we need quite a lot of this on home island as well, and we had a lot of surplus coconut husk, I've also doubled the production capacity of that as well. It seems to be fine now. Quite a lot of the coconut husk is getting disposed of in the heating towers, and I think we're going to need more of them to keep up. I think this system has come together quite nicely. We may have invented the solar system's first petrochemical industry based around party cocktails. There have been a number of tweaks needed because of some silly mistakes, and some because of expansion, but it's currently easily capable of keeping up with the ethanol requirements on the planet, so we'll have to see how it goes as our needs expand, and whether I can fit even more spaghetti in here. Speaking of spaghetti, before we head on back to the home island to see where all of this goes, let's take the miracle fuel I'm making on this island and switch as many machines over to using it as I can. Let's stop wasting coconut oil. And actually, speaking of that, let's check my maths on this. It would be rather embarrassing if it turned out that it's more efficient to just power things with the coconut oil. So, making 120 ethanol takes 20 nutrients and 5 bacteria, plus some other essentially free stuff. 5 bacteria is about half a fish, so that means another 50 nutrients. The total 70 nutrients requires 14 coconut meat, and now we're at a common source since coconut meat also makes the oil at a 1-to-1 ratio. So, doing the maths, we get about 8.5 times as much ethanol as coconut oil per coconut, and to make that even better, each unit of ethanol provides almost 7 times as much energy when used as a fuel, so it's actually about 57 times better. I guess we could have been drinking the coconuts all along. 57 times should be more than enough to cover any incidental losses from nutrients used in the biochambers and fuel in the calcinators. Where was I? Oh yes, spaghettiing the fuel. The ethanol area was easy. There's no reason to use anything else down here. The calciners were easy too. I just ran a pipe up along some wooden platform and swapped the connections over. The coconut processing was harder, both because it was already built and rather cramped, and therefore required squeezing some extra piping in, but mostly because the areas that handle the coconut oil itself were all far too mixed together, and so without a major redesign, I don't think I could extract one from the other. Ah, the joys of refactoring, or refactorioing. I think this level of switchover is probably fine, since there's not a lot of demand on the coconut oil at the moment anyway. After all that production, let's take a look at why we're doing all of this, what it's all for. Back over on home island, we can see that the port at the bottom, which used to be supplied with methane, now has ethanol coming in. Other than the fluid flavour, nothing has changed here. We're still pulling in barrels out on the right 2 rows, dumping the ethanol out of them, and then passing them back down to the ship. Once the ship fills up with empty barrels, it can go back to Coconut Island to fill back up again. Conveniently, all the methane pipes on this island were just being used to power machinery, which meant it was nice and simple to switch it over to ethanol. We just let the methane run low, voided the small amount remaining, and then pumped in the fresh ethanol and the machine switched over with no fuss. This bit was actually quite easy, and not just because Tristan did the work. We're also in the process of switching the ships over to using ethanol as fuel instead of methane. This gives them a roughly 50% speed boost, bringing them up to the terrifying speed of 20 kilometers an hour instead of 13, practically flying over the ocean. This is very welcome, as the ships are incredibly slow. We did consider in the future bringing some of the dream fuel over from Cubium to really spice things up, but there are a couple of problems with that idea. Firstly, by the time we get something like that set up, we'll hopefully be in a steady state where the capacity of the ships makes up for the speed. As the saying goes, never underestimate the bandwidth of a truck full of hard drives on the M40. And secondly, the ships can only actually take barreled fuel, so solid fuels like the Dream Fuel are sadly right out. The other ship from Coconut Island is the one we saw in the last video. This now travels over to Westport carrying a cargo of coconut oil barrels, sealant and activated carbon. These are being unloaded by filter inserters into the chests, and I'm not worrying about the quantities. They'll just unload until the chests are completely full. In theory, once the ship runs out of any one of the resources it's carrying, it will leave and travel back to Coconut Island to refill. However, this is a bit more complicated than normal. The obvious way to produce this sort of system is to monitor the resources and then depart when any of them drop to zero, which would be fine, except that we have to deal with the barrels. We don't really want to leave any empties in the port, because then there might not be enough in the ship for it to completely restock at the other end. And so, we watch for inactivity as well. The 5 seconds should give any barrels being processed time to be passed out from the unbarreling machine, round the belt and then back into the ship, and of course if additional barrels are unloaded in that time, the timer will be reset. This seemed great, but then I realised that a number of barrels could end up stuck in the input of the unbarreling machine if the oil tanks were full, and so the next stage was to connect the tanks to the inserters that unload the ship and tell them to only run if there's plenty of room in the tanks to empty the barrels. This neatly solved the problem, and I believe that this ship now works. The other complication in this station was related to fueling the machinery. We wanted to run all of the inserters and unbarrelers on ethanol if possible, so there's a feed of that coming in at the bottom. However, the two unbarreling machines need to output coconut oil, and so the output pipes need to be kept separate from the fueling ones, which is why there's a pair of underground pipes here. If I'd used any normal pipes at all on the outputs, they would have linked to the ethanol pipes above or below and mixed the fluids, and that would be bad. I was then able to put in some long inserters to reach over the underground pipes, grab the empty barrels and drop them onto the belt. Yes, these could actually be medium inserters, which would give a slightly shorter return belt, but the design went through a few iterations, a few stages of evolution, and these remained as you see them. Having these two underground pipes there meant there was no way to get the ethanol fuel through to the rest of the inserters to the north, and so I've simply routed that around the top. Currently, the coconut oil isn't actually being used at all on Home Island, but the sealant and activated carbon are both being dumped into provider chests, at least until we get round to setting up proper belt systems. This means that they can merrily supply them all and keep all our machinery being built. If I zoom out a bit, you'll notice that the island now looks very empty. This is because we've pulled out all the coconut plantations. Everything we needed from those is now being shipped in, so they were just a waste of space. We've also removed all the solar panels and all the accumulators because we want to produce as little electromagnetic pollution as we can, and solar panels are horribly dirty because they emit radiation all the time, no matter how much power is or isn't being used. Because we do need a little bit of electricity to keep the bots flying around, these have been replaced with a heating tower that burns activated carbon whenever it drops below 700 degrees, then passes that heat into a heat exchanger to make steam, and then the turbines can generate power as required. There are extra turbines and some steam tanks here to deal with any spikes in required power, so I think we have some good, reliable generation here, especially as, with the minimised power draw, the island is using significantly less than 2 megawatts. Next time, we'll take a look at another part of Pelagos and see the progress made by the others, but for now I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you'd like to give Pelagos and the rest of our solar system a try, you can install the Planetary Pioneers mod pack from the Factorio mod portal. If you use the seed 11111, then you'll end up playing in the same universe with the same planet generation as us, and if you do, please let us know how it goes for you on the Discord server. We'll be continuing the stream on Monday at 7:30 PM UK time, and I'll be back on Wednesday at 8 PM for a random stream as well. These videos come out every Thursday and Friday, so please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. I'll see you next time, unless I've collapsed from trying to drink Pelagos dry. Bye bye.